Good evening, everybody. Welcome again to another show, part of Amazing Advent. Tonight, I have a real treat for you in store. I am joined by somebody who you may know from Luke Avery's channel, Lambda Bible Studies, Philip or Philippocrit. Welcome, Philip. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Oh, it's good to have you here. For those who don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? What what you kind of do online, what your interests are, so on.
Yes, yeah. So I'm a theology student. I'm originally from South Africa, and I'm currently studying in Leipzig. And I've been uh, doing Bible exegesis on YouTube for a while now, for about a year, on a YouTube channel called Philippocrit, which is like Philip and hypocrite put together, which is difficult to spell, so I won't try to spell it here. And I've been on Lambda Bible Studies, as you've said, and then I've also written a book in recent years. So I'm also a self-published author currently, and
Yes.
that's maybe a good summary.
Yeah, excellent summary. And it's a good segue into the subject matter of tonight's stream because Philip was very kind to send me a copy of his. It's the 1 year anniversary edition. That's correct, right?
Yes,
Of
yeah.
Yeah, of The House of Noth. Buy it in all good bookstores. Well, Amazon at least, anyway. And it's before we get into the kind of actual content, I just want to show how beautiful this book is because you do all the illustrations yourself. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So you've got this lovely cover, but oh, isn't that fancy? The fancy face coming out in 3D. It's great. And
Yes.
then every chapter, you just open this thing up, and it's like, wow, look at this beautiful map that we've got going on here. Every chapter has different drawings in it. It feels it, to me like there's something. One of the things that you've done interestingly there is it's not just text that you're working with, you're also using visuals. And if I can find it, let's see, because you have a channel that goes with this
Oh,
book,
yes. Yeah, that's true. It's called The Roots of Day,
The Roots of Day,
which,
and
yes.
you can find things on it like this. Oh, sorry, I've forgotten to share the audio. Let me do that properly.
Ah,
Uh,
these are all done by my sister, I should say, just to give a shout out to her because I'm very grateful for all of the work that she's done. It's very high quality in
oh,
my
it's really good.
regard.
Yeah, because there's lots of little scenes like this, isn't there, on here, and see,
Dramatic music.
or if we scroll down a bit, I love the little animations that are added to the pictures.
Yes, I think those are quite great as well. It's incredible what you can do nowadays with free technology online, I think.
But yeah, so you get the picture, and I guess one of the things I wanted to ask was like, was that a conscious decision to try and make this work, not just a novel, but kind of use different media to communicate what the story?
Yes, it really was. I mean, as one sees with the cover, it's not so easy to read the title. I've modified it a bit since I probably
The
shouldn't say
cover.
that, but but now it looks like this. So it's still essentially the same, but
Ah,
it also has the title on the spine now. But the kind of primary feature of the cover is the fact that there's this face pressing itself through your bookshelf, and uh, and so just the cover itself was already a thought. It was supposed to grab your attention and seem like it's a much more living work. And then when you leaf through the pages, that was also definitely something that I was trying to convey, is that this experience is supposed to also be aesthetic to some degree, because aesthetics convey a kind of context as well, that deeply related to the contents of the work. So that was definitely a conscious thought as well. Yeah, especially for this first edition. Second edition, first year anniversary edition. The original one was a bit less sophisticated, I guess, if I can say it like that. And thank you for saying those kind words.
You're very welcome. I guess then that's a good segue into a C.S. Lewis passage I wanted to read at the beginning of this, because I thought it's a useful kind of summary of how I felt about the book. And I think what you've said about the aesthetic generating a certain kind of experience, you'll see the connection. So this comes from his very short essay, Some Fairy Stories May Say Best What to Be Said. And I'm kind of entering it about halfway through, and I'm gonna lift the paragraph and then move to the end of the essay. So he's talking about why did he write the Chronicles of Narnia. Then, of course, the man in me began to have his turn. I thought I saw how stories of this kind could steal past a certain inhibition which had paralyzed much of my own religion in childhood. Why did one find it so hard to feel as one was told one ought to feel about God or about the sufferings of Christ? I thought the chief reason was that one was told one ought to. An obligation to feel can freeze feelings, and reverence itself did harm. The whole subject was associated with lowered voices, almost as if it were something medical. But supposing that by casting all these things into an imaginary world, stripping them of their stained glass and Sunday school associations, one could make them for the first time appear in their real potency. Could one not thus steal past those watchful dragons? I thought one could. The fantastic or mythical is a mode available at all ages for some readers, for others at none. At all ages, if it is well used by the author and meets the right reader, it has the same power to generalize while remaining concrete, to present in palpable form not concepts or even experiences, but whole classes of experience, and to throw off irrelevancies. But at its best, it can do more. It can give us experiences we have never had, and thus, instead of commenting on life, can add to it. I am speaking, of course, about the thing itself, not my own attempts at it. And I guess my reading this book, that's the thing I really took away. And if there was a strapline I wanted the audience to come away with, it's that I felt the ideas you were dealing with, or the themes that you were trying to play with, and through the narrative, the sequence of events captured those ideas and elicited in me an experience of them. We're going to come to issues of kind of wandering and searching for home, or looking for purpose in the world. And these things I felt while reading it. I just wondered what your thoughts were first on what Lewis had to say, and then, you know, do you feel that's part of your work, how that kind of integrated into it? I think we may have lost Philip. Let's see. Well, while we're waiting on Philip to get back to us, I think so one of the things that Lewis says is that in another essay on stories, he talks about how there's a tension within every story between the plot, which is a sequence of events, and the themes of the book, which are really what many books are about, is its themes. Because a theme isn't a sequence, it's not process, it's not chronological, whereas a plot is. And so a plot can capture a theme to greater or lesser extents. Never completely, because of the contingent nature. I feel that a lot of this book does have that, and does manage to achieve that. Philip, are you back with us?
I think so.
I think so.
Returned. I've passed through fire and shadow. Yeah.
Oh well, I hope I'm not a crooked worm that you have to bandy words with. So,
Well,
so did you catch my question before you phased out?
not entirely. I heard the reading of the essay you did, and then
Okay.
you said that this was your experience, which was very gratifying. But then the question itself got chopped off.
Well, I was asking, what do you agree with Lewis's interpretation of fantasy and a myth, given this is a fantasy or mythical work that you've done, but then also how you kind of then approach that as an author in terms of the ideas that you have, and then trying to make them be felt.
Yes, I really like the way that he phrased it. Even in the way that he put it, it was very artful, and I think that one gets the sense. And I think in English literature, especially among the academics or the intellectuals of the English world that busied themselves with this kind of shines through in a way that I don't see in Germany during the same time period. If one looks at around the early 20th century or something like that, and because they also spend a lot of time thinking about myth and what it means and how it's significant for human lives because of the crisis that universities were facing at the time, where there was this danger of like hyper empiricism or something, and materialism taking over the world, and stories of the children that should be banished into the nursery, where people like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, I think, did a lot of work to combat that, or to just prove that it isn't true. And it reminds me of things like folklore, which were just an intimate part of everyday life for all ages, and it kind of connected people across different age ranges, going back before the Enlightenment and even after the Enlightenment, depending on which circles you moved in, I guess. Uh, but but this way of understanding the human as a living being that moves through reality on multiple different levels at the same time, I think that's something that is being addressed here, which having a purely analytical approach to storytelling or to history or something like that doesn't do justice to. So I agree. I think using pictures and imagery and meaning and experience and weaving it all together in a poetic and artful way often does reality more justice than trying to just break it down to mere facts and stringing them together like, I don't know, a worm on the end of a fishing rod or something.
Yeah, I think that's right in terms of, as human beings, it's very easy to focus on one faculty and take that as the fundamental. So often that's been reason or rationality. I guess that comes from Aristotle in a sense, with the distinguishing feature of human being is the rational part of the soul. However, if you look at the romantics, perhaps it's emotion which goes too far. That it's actually the real part of us is the emotional. We need to get beyond rationality. And in a sense, today, perhaps it's just desire. Like what you desire is really who you are, or maybe it's your lived experience, something like that. And so that's who you are. But actually, with something like a novel, or as you say, like all these different um, aspects, so the written word, the aesthetic, the musical, all of these things coming together speak to different parts of who we are, and thus kind of can be used to convey something about who we are and the world around us, which is actually in dialogue with our whole being and not just one part of it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I don't know if I can build on that. That was very eloquently put.
Oh well, okay. One thing I wanted to kind of touch on here, because you mentioned about telling stories during, in a pre-modern context, and one of the bits that jumped out to me in the story is there's a section where there is I guess the first part of the book really follows a tribe, essentially, and this tribe has a meeting at one point, and I'm just going to read a little bit from the beginning of that meeting where the chief addresses the group. "We shall begin," said he, addressing the village gathered about him, "as is our custom. We shall begin with the retelling of our fortunes. We shall hear the history of our people. Today it will not be sung. Today I will tell it, for today we must be of sober mind. Be sober of mind. A turning of the tide is upon us, a wending of the world. We may not forget that. Before our ways were established, our fathers wandered ways of their own. Before them, their fathers walked ways of their own. It is ours to honor our fathers and walk wisely for ourselves." What struck me about this passage, and more the tone of the work in general, was the sense that stories are not just for pleasure or entertainment, although that's a part of what they are, but actually how we describe ourselves, how we look at our history is a story in itself. And when we kind of forget that it is a story or something that needs to be told, we're losing something quite important. And that opening passage seemed to really speak to that idea.
Yes, yeah. I also well, it's interesting that you brought up that passage, because I think there's also an intentional kind of ambiguity to a lot of the things that happen to the tribe and the decisions that the tribe make, that makes it a bit difficult to pinpoint whether or not what they are doing is always a good idea, or what they're saying is right or true in an absolute kind of way. But I think it is interesting that there is always this kind of tension between that which you inherit and that which you then do yourself. So in some way, we as humans, like you were saying, basically, is we as humans are living, breathing stories, and the way in which we walk through the world is the way in which the story of us is told. And so we're not fully conscious of literally everything that we do, which means that there's a much bigger input than simply the things that we decide to do that determines what we do, and that determines what shape our life takes. And the road that lies ahead of us is often not visible to us, and so it's a very difficult road to walk oftentimes, because we have to trust the things that we've inherited through the traditions that we're a part of, and how we trust it or how we implement it in the given situations in which we are confronted by difficulty, I think is that problem that we're all confronted with on a regular basis, that the chieftain there is also speaking about on a bigger scale, I guess, than the merely individual level.
Well, it's communal, isn't it, as well? It's not. I guess that's one of the things that our cultures in the Western world tend to focus on, is your story is defined by you, or you get to determine your life and your story, whether that's through economic decisions or how you want to identify with pronouns or language, or however you want to do it. It's you that decides your story. Whereas in this case, as you say, it's the chieftain speaking to a community who together are going to make a decision. And in a way, in a sense, that's to me more true to life, that even if it's not clear what the right decision is to make, even given the stories, at the end of the day, all the stories we tell about ourselves are thoroughly communal in nature. It's not like, even the thing to define it for myself is it comes from a community understanding that that's what it means for our story. We're the people who define our own stories.
Yeah, I wonder if there isn't even a kind of morality that's developed out of that, which is quite interesting. I've been wondering about it just looking at the graffiti that's like sprawling across every inch of the walls of Leipzig where I'm staying, and it makes me wonder what drives people to kind of generate these libraries of cryptic knowledge across the landscape of this confused city. And I think it's just got something to do with rootlessness, or being uprooted, where you're almost morally obliged to reject and deny the tradition that you're actually originally a part of, that you're growing out of organically like a tree, which is another image that comes up in the story, a tree at war with itself. But I guess another way in which one could look at it is that the tree is rejecting the nutrients that the ground around it is trying to give it, or the tree is just not taking it up, or it's a sick tree, which I guess also describes a person very accurately a lot of the time.
Most definitely. And you mentioned roots. Well, it's part of the Roots of the Day series, isn't it? So this theme of being rooted or uprooted, I guess is if people are wanting to know what kind of experience this book gets at, I think that's part of it. It's and that's why I kind of titled this stream "Writing Fantasy or Mythology and Modernity," because it seemed that this kind of experience that you're talking about, the deracination or the sense of being isolated or not belonging to a tradition or community any longer, not living in that way, seems to be one that many people in our sphere, very broadly speaking, are wrestling with, and they're trying to find different answers to it. And nobody really seems to have a clear answer at the moment, because everything seems to be in constant flux. And wherever we try to put our roots, our homeland or home community, it doesn't seem to stay any longer. And so this idea of so the tribe is a wandering tribe, which and it's more than that. There seems to be this, not just the tribe, but many characters seem to be in a kind of exile throughout the story, whether it's self-imposed or imposed upon them by somebody else. Then they're unable to return until something has happened, but not necessarily within their power. And so I think it's really words, Nathan. It's driving in on that experience of dislocation that many of us feel. At least that's how I experienced the book.
Yeah, well, that's very nice to hear, because that's one of the reasons why this tribe is also so intimately connected with water, and especially with the river, because the river is it not only is kind of in flux itself constantly, it's just a passing thing. It's like the embodiment of transience in a lot of ways. It also rives away at that's where the name river comes from, the word to rive, to kind of cleave into the landscape, and it removes parts of the landscape. It kind of disembeds bits of the landscape and washes them away. And so there's a lot, and you've got that famous phrase from one of the pre-Socratics, I think, pantare, everything flows, which all comes together in this kind of mythological experience, I guess, of this river people tribe. And that's exactly what it's supposed to embody. It's those who are lost, and maybe to some degree that's a communal experience, but there are also then, as you indicate, characters that are experiencing the same thing on a more individual level. And maybe I can say a marsh would also be a nice example of this kind of an experience of dislocation and disorientation. Yes, it also makes me think of the Tower of Babel, which is also kind of important, because that's also a motif that's definitely there in the story. But I don't know if I should go into that.
You do what you want to do. It's your book. It's your book.
Okay, well, I can. Yes, well, I won't go into too much detail with it, but I think just as a concept, it's also interesting that the Tower of Babel is an attempt to to claim heaven or to realize it or to make it manifest by means of our own power. And in the history of the world, according to sacred scripture, heaven realizes itself without us trying to, and we can call upon it, and it is gracious to listen to our prayer. He is, but to try and take it by force is always a dangerous game to play. And the Tower of Babel in the Bible is definitely that story in Genesis 11, where humanity tries to claim heaven for itself, and what happens instead is that humanity is cast into disorientation, is sort of thrown to the powers of the transient world. Those powers themselves having been made transient, they are gods, but they will die like men, depending on how you read these texts. And so there's definitely some similar stuff going on in the background of the House of Noth, where humanity has also been cast, and especially this clan has been cast into the power of, or into the domain of the transient powers, if one will. And that causes a lot of conflict and confusion, and through the stubbornness, the pride, especially the pride, I guess, of humanity, the hubris, we continually prevent that which is actually good for us to reach us. Not because it isn't trying, or not because it doesn't want to, but because we don't want it to, because we don't trust it. And I guess there's then also the whole topic complex of trust and why that's important, because it's the foundation for everything good. If you trust the good. Yes, but I think that's where I'll leave it for now with regards to the Tower of Babel.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean, and I wanted to share just a couple of these paintings by John Martin. I don't know if you've ever come across John Martin, but he's one for these fantastic dramatic judgment scenes. He just seemed to love them. So this is the great day of his wrath, and then we have the last judgment, and then we have Sodom and Gomorrah, which I think is perhaps his most yeah, go ahead, Philip.
No, well, that one I recognize. That's
okay. But what these paintings communicate to me is this sense of human beings have our civilization, have our plans, and often we think if we just, it's within our power to complete them, and there's nothing else going on behind it. But then when they run up against something that's real, external reality, which is so much more powerful than anything we are just transient in comparison to it, and all our plans are shown to be fraudulent and evil or wicked, and they all come crashing down under this great mighty power. And one of the things that struck me in the book was that kind of feeling that actually a lot of the characters, they think they can achieve various things or do certain things. They come up against something which they are unable to overcome themselves. And it's really only through some other power, which is beyond their kind of expectations or understanding, that they're able to actually have victory. It's not within themselves, it's within something else. And so I see some connection between this painting and the theme in the book there.
Yes, maybe it's even a connection that goes beyond theme into into plot, but I think I don't want to necessarily.
No, you don't need to. You don't need to be detailed about it. I guess I guess we've been circling around this idea of stories, and one of the ideas I have is that an aspect of why we kind of have done away with mythology or fantasy or kind of religiosity and stories about the powers beyond our own understanding and control. We've kind of forgotten these things because we want to do these things. And if we want to do certain things, and if we were aware of these realities, we would not be pursuing some of these projects. But because we don't want to face that reality, because we want our dream fulfilled, we kind of forget that, oh, actually, there is a divine reality which can do this, what this painting shows. And you know, so we kind of, we don't just forget it, we purposefully block it out, and then it hits back in a way that we're not expecting. And so this is one of the values of something like fantasy or mythology, is it kind of give us that sense of, oh, we're not just the highest beings in the world, actually there's something much more powerful here. There are forces beyond our control.
Well, yeah, I think one of the reasons why I don't read a lot of modern fantasy, I mean I do, but but not a lot of it, is that I get the sense that despite the fact that it's fantasy, the authors often try to rationalize a lot of the mystical elements away out of their world. Like they try to just create a different empirical and materialist logic according to which the world works, but it's still essentially materialism and imperialism. I mean, empiricism, maybe also imperialism. I don't know, but what Tolkien definitely, and he's obviously like the main inspiration for the aesthetic that this book has. Even though he obviously draws on a lot of simply Western culture and tradition, so I don't know if I can simply nail him down as the guy who coined the aesthetic, but what he does really well is that he captures exactly what you described, the sense of the numinous sense. I think H.P. Lovecraft does it as well in a way that always fascinates me again, but is a lot darker and a lot less hopeful. And I think that maybe with Lovecraft one sees exactly this more destructive justice that you've described as well, where there is a power that's beyond comprehension, that absolutely ruins your soul in some sense as soon as you come into contact with it, and absolutely ravishes you like Sodom. And I think that's kind of what we bring on ourselves when we are not capable of realizing that the true myth, as Tolkien would also call it, the one of Christ crucified, I guess, is the one of Scripture, the narrative of God's word, which is also that through which creation is made and through which it gains its concrete shape, which is a very mythological and fantastical and imaginative shape, I think, in contrast to what a lot of scientists would have us believe nowadays. I think what he does really well, Tolkien and others, is that he manages to... Wait, sorry, I've crossed the streams. What I'm trying to say is that there's the evil force that comes along essentially, or that acts as a response to how we as humans reject the fact that the greater reality, the one that we would like to shape through domination, is better for us, or is even more beautiful, objectively speaking, than what we desire. And if we allow it to shape our desires rather than it being the other way around, that we try to shape it by means of our desires. So if we give up, if we sacrifice and surrender our agency for the sake of allowing an agent to work through us as though we were rather instruments or catalysts for something, I think that's what then averts this kind of sodomite destruction and permits a kind of salvation despite the destruction, maybe like Noah in Noah's Ark, or the numerous other accounts of the messiahs that come through the Old Testament as a shadow of the ultimate Messiah.
Yeah, indeed. I think one of the things that you really tease out is the actual difficulty, though, in knowing the plan, or how we individually conform to that plan. There seems to be... It seems that we often think one thing is what the divine is calling us to do, or what the numinous is kind of directing us towards, but actually we're mistaken about that. And a number of characters have to learn or relearn what their purpose is in the story. They either have an exaggerated sense of their role within the world, or they have a wrong understanding of their vocation within it. And there's a little passage that I just want to read, and a lot of it, the kind of concrete aspects might not make sense to folks in the audience yet. You'll need to go and buy the book. But but I think the ideas will articulate some of what we're talking about. So this is the shepherd speaking. Every quest, if followed through to the end, will cleave from you what will stand in the way of its completion. If it tries to take from you what you will not let go, then it will tear it away and do even greater damage than was first necessary. But the quest that has been put on our Gabazi, the quest that has replaced his identity with the title of Dragon Hunter and then stripped him of it, has replaced a vague life with one of absolute purpose. And absolute purpose claims the whole life. He cannot stop, save at whiles to rest, until he has reached the intended end. That is a hard saying, shepherd, muttered Othane. The shepherd hummed a part of the melody to the song he had sung when they had arrived. You only find it a hard saying because you want to follow him to his intended end, young Althane, thrummed the shepherd. But it may be that you have your own ends to meet, apart from those of the legendary Gabazi. Yes, his is a cosmic story, but that is his to give. Yours may be far more humble and far more meaningful than ever the very wise could tell. For those of us who know much are often also blind to much more. Were you to be taken by an end that you desire, you would not find it a hard saying. You would only strive to attain it. I find this this passage to be illuminating in that sense of it, the shepherd's right that if we have a mission, then it is all consuming, and that drives us. And I guess that's the Carlylean great man or hero is somebody who sincerely believes in the transcendent and wants to conform all things to that in their kind of sphere. And so that's what sets them apart from everybody else, is their absolute drive towards that. But then Althan's kind of why he finds it difficult, as the passage says, is he has a wrong understanding of his mission, or he has a sense in which his mission might not be what he wants, that he might have to conform himself absolutely to something which he'd rather not do. He'd rather be heroic, maybe, or like Gabazi the Dragon Hunter in some way. And I do think that's something that I wrestle with, and I think many people today wrestle with, is actually because we don't have this settled communal society anymore, where you do what your father did or what's been given to you by the community to do as your kind of vocation. Now it's up to you to find out what's going on. It could be very hard to find that purpose which fits what we're able to do and what's needed at that time.
Yeah, I think a lot of rites of passage are essentially something like a baptism. And I think baptism is then the ultimate fulfillment of what those things are trying to be. The ultimate manifestation of how God establishes the connection between heaven and earth, or between the transcendent and the mundane and transient. And that is that you die and then you rise from the dead. It's the image of the phoenix as well. And I think a life, any human life, is always, it's like a daily dying to something and then arising again. And there we might look again at the image of the river, because that's also a very pivotal aspect of the sort of sense of communion that the river people have in their culture, which is that they gather around this river, and then everything continually passes away. But there is also some sense of tradition that remains throughout all of that transience. And it's that thing that you want to bring out as clearly as you possibly can, and through daily kind of dying to your individual and egocentric desires, the more that higher reality, or that truer truth can be brought to bear through you. It's like gold being refined through fire. So fire might be another example. Can bring in all of the different elements from the ancient Greeks. Yes, but I definitely think that's something that lies at the heart of human nature, as something that is teleological as well. So human nature has an intended end towards which it has been designed to move, or for which it has been built. In the sense, humans are also kind of like houses or temples, I think, that are inhabited by spirits. And again, if one sees the way in which the shepherd is speaking about purpose there, absolute purpose, he speaks about the absolute purpose as though it is the agent, and the human is only a kind of carrier of the purpose, or a house of the purpose, and is inhabited by the by the absolute purpose. And so that's also, again, a bit contrary, or in contrast to a sort of Nietzschean. I've got a friend who's been looking into this with very thoroughly, very scientifically, and I'm very grateful to have him to speak to, because it also helps me clarify my thoughts. But it's definitely something that I encountered with Nietzsche and nihilism, and then also a kind of sense of heroism that grows out of that, and maybe a false sense of manliness, where I think there's some some truth to the claims of toxic masculinity or something like that, that are derived from this Nietzschean manliness, which is essentially nihilistic. So if your principles, or if your presuppositions are that there is no meaning in reality, then you are the one who has to create meaning, which means, again, that you are the agent and you dominate. You not only determine, you kind of create out of nothing, out of the nothing that you're faced with, a purpose. And then you also, at the expense of all of your neighbors, so you sacrifice everything except yourself to attain this purpose, you then manage to attain something. I don't know if it is actually the purpose. Maybe you attain the purpose, but then it's not as satisfying as you were hoping it to be, which is in direct contrast to a more Christian perspective, which would be that God is the ultimate purpose. He is the one into whose arms we want to run, like a prodigal son running into the arms of his father. And that's also teleological. And you only run into the arms of your father if you recognize him as a father who loves you, who wants you back. And if you do that at the expense of your own desires, because often our desires are in contradiction to the discipline of a father, which is always intended to be loving, right? He's trying to guide you to live a good life, but you reject that guidance because you think you can do it better, or because there is a gap between you and your father, and you don't trust that he's actually the good, but you think that beyond the nihilism, beyond the nothing, there is only evil. Yeah, I hope that made sense. Sorry, I do speak in mystical tongues sometimes.
It's wonderful. I think one of the things I wanted to pick up on there was, so you're contrasting passivity and activity, or at least who is the agent, and I guess kind of tying it in with something we were talking about earlier, with the there's deep, powerful forces in this world that modernity tries to say don't exist, but they are there. In the pre-modern world, when you look at the soul, it's not a buffered thing. It's not something which is cut off from the rest of reality like it is today. Well, that's how we think about it today. So I see a TV show, I get a representation of it through my senses into my mind, I have a feeling about it, and then that's the end of it. Whereas in the pre-modern mind. Let's just take medieval Catholicism as an example. The devil isn't just an external being. He can enter into your soul. And when you have a temptation or a doubt about doctrine, medieval Catholics would say that's the devil present in your soul, an invader in your soul. By contrast, when you have the gift of faith or of loving your neighbor, that's not just you, that's the Holy Spirit in you, working in you and through you. This is very alien to us because our conceptual framework doesn't allow for us to be a stage for other beings to enter into. But in the pre-modern world, those very deep powers which can crush a city can also be working upon you and shaping the way you think, the way you feel, the way that you act. And so this idea that we can be the agent independently, striking out into the world and making it our own, it's ignoring those deep powers, which even beyond the Christian tradition, if you took somebody like Jung and his sense of archetypes, these things are not just ideas. For him, the Odinic spirit is something almost alive for him that really captured Nazi Germany. That's how he could explain it. It wasn't just a psychological thing. It was a spirit that kind of wrestled control of the German people. So I think how you put it really helps to see that idea, and I think the book has that in the sense of it doesn't see people as just kind of atomized individuals interacting. Actually, there's things working upon them and through them. The very universe itself, or the numinous, is going in them in various ways.
That's an interesting observation, because this friend that I was speaking about also he's also currently reading through the book, and he said that it struck him how often there are individuals that are just interacting on the stage, as it were. In a scene, you'll have like two people having a conversation, or maybe three. Often, not always. There are also sometimes we've got whole crowds interacting and so on. But that really stood out to him, and I told him that I was trying to often through the characters, because I'm also trying to explore something like fractal characters, which is maybe archetypal in nature, but it also explores how there are fractures of characters that can or fragments of characters that can be found in other maybe side characters or something like that, as if there are main characters and then all of the side characters that character interacts with are shadows or aspects of the more main characters, so that you've got this hierarchy of characters that are all interacting in a self-referential and self-interpretive sense. And anyway, so the way in which these scenes are supposed to work, where there are individuals that are meeting and having a conversation or something, the way in which that is supposed to come across, at least that's what I was hoping, I don't know if it worked, is something like iconography, where it's more representative of something deeper. And I think, again, that's a function that storytelling can fulfill if one does it according to or if one does it in a way that does human nature justice, that recognizes the human as a whole being that is comprised of what did you have earlier? Body, mind, and spirit, or something like that. Soul, spirit, and
we'll go
heart.
with that.
Okay. Yes, yeah, but so I find that really interesting. And I think maybe if one, because the contrast between the individual and the community, or the communal way of understanding things, that's come up a couple of times. I think the way in which these two realities, because they both are a reality, can have like a hive mind controlling or the spirit of Odin possessing Germany for a time. At the same time, you've got each individual bearing the responsibility for that. And you can see that in the traumatized way every single German walks around the streets of of Leipzig to this day. But not maybe that's an over exaggeration, but it's definitely left deep scars because shame and guilt are a reality that ends up not only being ascribed to the spirits that are fallen, that will also be condemned, that take advantage of us as humans, but the humans also get pulled into this responsibility, into the shame and the guilt that comes along with great crimes. And yes, and so you've got the communal level in which spirits can take possession of us. We can each be individual building stones in a bigger house, but at the same time, as individuals, we are also houses, I think, to stick to that metaphor, and because it's the title of the book. And as individuals that are houses, we do bear responsibility because I've forgotten the point that I wanted to make. Oh, because we are representatives again of the community of which we're a part. So there's maybe again this Carlyle's idea of a priest as hero or something like that. That he not only embodies a divine truth and mediates that like a lawgiver or something like that, which I guess Evola also speaks about it, but that these are mediators of divine truths. They're like prophets. Especially in modern thought, people equate Goethe or something like that to the biblical prophets, which I would not go that far. But but you just have the idea of the artist or the genius or something like this, who mediates heavenly realities through his work. At the same time, each individual is a representative before the heavenly throne of the community of which he is a part. So that you bear your own sins, but at the same time, you also bear the sins of your fathers. Even though in the new covenant that is dissolved and collapsed into the ultimate pinnacle of this whole fractal character hierarchy, I guess, which is Jesus, who takes the sins of the fathers and the sins of the individuals unto himself and becomes the ultimate representative of humanity before the Father, the ultimate high priest, one might say. But I think, yeah, that's also where the two realities, that of the individual and the collective, they come together in the priest, which anyway, that's that.
I guess you're getting at the kind of paradoxical nature of these things, whereas we want to divide them up into community or individual, but actually the two go together in the person of the priest, or being in the possession of a great power of a spirit, but also being responsible for your action. I think the river people, they come from the moon. Is the light of the moon and the dust of the earth come together in these people, and human being, I guess, is like that. If we're not just material and we're not just spiritual, we're the two together. But this is a tension, but it's also a reality. And if we want, and we keep going back around to the whole human being, or the whole of human existence, requires the recognition of the tensions of the paradoxical character of it. And I think you see that most clearly. You've been alluding to this with the incarnation, which is paradoxical in the sense that it goes beyond anything we can understand. How God, divine and human, can become one, as it were, in one person. So I definitely saw that in the text, and the kind of paradoxical character, or moving beyond what is within our kind of conceptual boundaries. I thought there's an interesting little bit right at the beginning. It is the contents page, because I'm expecting a list of chapters, and what do I get? But this really weird and interesting page. And one of the things I liked about it is you can read it in multiple ways, the sentences on it. It could be said in multiple ways. So, have you not been inside, traveller, a house before? Or have you, traveller, been inside a house before? And so on, so on and so forth. You can see it in different ways because the shape of it is not what it's not horizontal. It could be read in different ways. So I get that sense from the book very much of trying to enter into realms that you have no idea which way you're going, but it is, there's a sense of reality to it.
Yeah, there's also another little Easter egg, I guess, to the contents, which is that there's small points that can orient you, but you have to know that they're giving you guidance, which also ties into what you were saying a little bit. But to have this the step and the for people that have the book, that indicates that that's the beginning of a sentence. But if you don't know that, then you struggle to find the beginning of the sentence. And I keep having fun with people trying to read this page and taking their time to figure it out.
But that's part of it. I think that's part of life in general, is that we're very good at existing in our little echo chambers or closed boxes and cutting ourselves off from deeper truths about the world. And that can be very much in an online context, where on something like Twitter, you can really surround yourself with people who agree with you or largely agree with you. But in life in general, if you just keep to your routines, don't push the boundaries in your life in any way, then you can kind of close yourself off. Something like this, or I would say a book like G.K. Chesterton's The Man Who Was Called Thursday. One thing that sort of contents page does, or that book does, is it gives you a set of assumptions. Okay, what's a contents page like? It flips them upside down and makes you see it in a totally new way. And that's kind of wrestling with the paradoxes of things for me. Is you never reach an end point, but you can see it in a new way, or learn to see it in a bigger way than you did before.
Yes, that's true. I mean, this philosophy of our age, the great philosopher of our time, Charlie. I'm talking about Marx. I actually don't want to say his name even, but he really seemed to go in the direction of turning paradoxical poles against one another. So you've got the poles that establish like a magnetic field in this entire cosmos, so an ordered reality within which everything has its place. And then he goes and sort of like turns the poles against each other, and the entire cosmos collapses into, I don't know, a black hole or something. Because he can't recognize, or he intentionally, I think, out of bitterness, that's my impression from what I've read of him and about him. My impression is that out of bitterness, he just cannot come to terms with, despite the fact that he's a rather well-off kind of guy. I mean, relatively speaking, he can't come to terms with the fact that there is a hierarchical order that is good, not because it's good that people get oppressed or something when people take advantage of the power that they have, but because some people they've been entrusted with more so that they can serve better. They're empowered to serve in a greater way than others could. And that's something that I think the ideologies of our times just don't understand. They don't understand the necessity of hierarchical order so that greater servants can do what they're supposed to be doing. And so it is sometimes the case that there are elements in a construction that are greater than others, and one has to be able to recognize this and to submit oneself to them, which cannot take place if you do not acknowledge what we call paradoxes, but what I actually think are kind of polar realities. I don't know if they're bipolar or if they're like interpolar or elliptic, or but they establish tensions that create multiple dimensional realities.
Well, no, I think if you think about the philosopher John McMurray, 20th century philosopher, he spoke about how it's the primary way we know about the world is touch. We think it's sight, but actually, like if you take sight, you can believe that we're in a dream world, a kind of Cartesian reality. Oh, I can imagine this sight that I'm having is illusory because of the angles of it. Perspective can be shown to give one idea of an object which is kind of misleading. So maybe I see it as really small, but it's just because it's far away. And then you get to the idea, well, maybe it's all illusory. Maybe it's a dream created by an evil demon, so on and so forth. Matrix kind of speaks to this. But with touch, what's happening is one object is in contact with another, and you're being resisted by that object. That's literally what touch is. If two objects coming together and resisting one another, you cannot really seriously doubt the reality of that which you touch. And it's through touch that we are able to build things. And it's the tensions between these, the actual resistances, which allow for certain structures to exist. A bridge could not exist if there was not tension, literally. Right. So we see in the physical world that it is you could almost say the conflict between different objects, which allows for them to build into something else. So I can definitely see then, if that's a resemblance of the metaphysical, then that principle makes a lot of sense, of this tension holding things up, or allowing for them to have an order, because without that tension they just disappear, they fall apart into anarchy and dissolution.
Maybe order is a nicer word than hierarchy. I was looking for a for a word, but I think order is a lot nicer, because I think hierarchy it's just a consequence of order, and it's not the only shape that order can take. That's just if you kind of have vertical and horizontal, aspects coming together in a specific way. I'm just going to claim that for now. I don't know how accurate that is, but that's how I understand it.
Well,
yeah.
maybe I could pick your brains on something. This is a little bit of a left field shoot from the book, but it's kind of following on from our discussion. I've been thinking a lot recently about chimpanzee hierarchy. Don't ask why. But I did a video a few months ago on it, and the ways in which they compete for hierarchy, and it's very similar to human society. And one of the things that really struck me is, I think the chimp, although in some ways it's not like us, is much more like us than the ant. But both have a hierarchy, right? So the ant, you're literally the queen ant will lay the eggs, and some of the eggs, there'll be worker ants, some of them will be soldier ants, and some of them will be queen ants. There's no choice about it. It's decided beforehand. It's not even decided. It's just part of the process. And she'll lay as many are needed of each caste, and then they'll go out, and almost in an emergent way, they'll just follow their programming, as it were, responding to situations for the good of the colony. And that hierarchy is never in challenge. The queen's always at the top. The workers have no concept that their productivity is being robbed by the bourgeoisie or something like that. The ants just
what? Well, we need to enlighten them.
I know, we need to liberate the ants.
Yeah.
But whereas the chimpanzees, even when they get a settled hierarchy, the males can't help themselves but compete for power again. So even if they've lost like 5 minutes ago being alpha male, they're back at it like again. And this cycle repeats and goes on and on and on. There's nothing the chimp can do about it. And so part of me wondered whether this is this is also true of human being. That actually, when it comes to hierarchies of that kind, that some thinkers like Plato or Julian Huxley would say, if we just get the system right, if we get everybody their allotted role, then we will have the perfect harmonious society. I guess A Brave New World speaks to this idea, the world that's been created there. But actually, even if you had everybody kind of born to a caste, there would still be this competition. There would still be struggle for more and less power. Maybe in part because people get older, people get stronger or weaker, and so on and so forth. So there's a shifting of the natural hierarchy. But if that's the case, then actually, rather than denying that reality, coming back round to the point, rather than denying the reality that there is always competition, actually the tension model that you were talking about, the tension metaphysically, actually having a social system which recognizes the competition between humans as a necessary reality and tries to build that tension in such a way that is productive and creative and supportive of flourishing would be much better.
Yeah, I also think if people are more rigorous in their in their testing of one another, well, maybe not entirely. If there's some kind of a practical wisdom that goes hand in hand with how we interact with one another, and so the wiser a society is, the better they are at playing this social game of testing the limits, because they don't go too far, but they make sure that the limits really are in place on a regular basis, so that, because that's kind of like maintenance. I was in the mountains on the eastern border of Germany recently to visit a friend, and it was incredible. They had a cellar, and firstly they have this incredible like cottage in the mountains, but then the cellar underneath works exactly on this principle. And I guess Gothic arches, we also went to some ruins and so on, and those worked with the same principle, which is that it doesn't matter how much pressure you put onto the arch from above or so on, it only contributes to the strength of the arch because it forces the arch to press into itself even more, and by doing that, it just creates greater stability in some way. So I think there's definitely something to that, the self-maintenance of human society that is established through this. And what I really like is I'm a Lutheran theologian, and Luther speaks about the masks of God, but I'm pretty sure that it goes back before him as well, or at least speaking in ways that are similar. I mean, he did a lot of Bible exegesis, so one can also say it's biblical. One just has to find it in scripture. But what I find interesting is that we often speak and think about hierarchy in terms of emergent phenomena. So, and that's also kind of how Genesis 1, the creation account, speaks, that the things begin with nothing, where you've got the chaos, the water, the kind of infinite potential, and then out of that, you get something that becomes more and more crystalline in its structure, more and more ordered and perfect, until you reach the pinnacle, which is the tree of life. Well, humanity, actually. and that's kind of the emergent way of looking at it. But I think the ancients often, when they encountered apes especially, which is fascinating, they categorized them as something that was fallen. I mean, even the name ape implies that the creature is just playing at being human. It's not a real human. It's like a fallen away human, or a cursed group of humans that once used to be human, but they've been turned into animals or something like this. At least I think one encounters that in some of the ancient literature. That's what I'm vaguely having in memory at the moment. And I find that interesting, because then instead of it only being seen as emergent, so there's clearly someone who's like an architect building up this great architectural masterpiece. At the same time, there's a heavenly ideal that is being built towards by the architect, not by humanity. So it's not a Tower of Babel. It's the opposite. It's God's construction without humanity rebelling, in the ideal case. And I think the role that suffering plays is also integral to this. But he's building this this ideal reaching towards heaven, and the ideal exists in heaven already. And so he's bringing the two into harmony with one another, the material or the earthly and the heavenly world. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? There you've got that dualism, and there it's perfectly in harmony with itself. And you've got instead of it being purely emergent, which is the way we see things now, because we think we've been cut off, or we have the sense that we are cut off from heaven and that there is nothing in heaven. So it's a nihilistic approach. The emergence is all there is. There's nothing else. We're striving towards yet unshaped futures. Meanwhile, the ideal is the future, and it's teleologically calling us towards itself. and one can also read the emergence as like that which remains despite everything else falling away. So that and that's how God speaks about himself as a potter, or if he were someone who whittled, a carpenter maybe, or something like this, that he carves away that which is unnecessary. I think circumcision is also deeply related to this. As he carves away that which is unnecessary, the truth of who he is brought forth, is revealed, is made maybe also vulnerable, can be killed on a cross of wood. But even in that ultimate moment of shame, the absolute truth is revealed, which is that invincible truth of life, despite entropy, for example, or which is also this kind of paradox that we find ourselves in, cosmologically speaking, or light despite darkness, truth despite a world of lies. So you've got the emergence, but it's actually always despite the falling away from the original ideal, or something like that.
Yeah, that is a really good way to put it, and I think we could pursue so many different angles on that. There's so much people could go away and think about. I guess one thing that really struck me there was you were talking about this driving towards the teleological purpose, or the end of the individual creature, but then the whole creation together as a sum. But the process itself is having value. That it's not just the means kind of are just irrelevant. Actually, these images of being a potter or a carpenter of some kind, the method of refinement has its own value. And indeed, Irenaeus, for example, would talk about suffering as being key to almost taking the original creation and making it something which is even better than could have been brought into existence at the very beginning. That without that suffering, you wouldn't have that process of learning good and evil. For example, so he wouldn't have used this example, but I remember in A levels we were taught, if you touch a hot kettle, you learn not to do that again because of the pain of it. And I guess for Irenaeus, this is the sense in which when we do evil or when we sin and we suffer as a consequence, we learn, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And more broadly, suffering, as you've alluded to with Christ, the suffering of Christ, the crucifixion, is the means by which there is the redemption of the world. In an earlier video, I also spoke about how in other traditions, you have Odin on the world tree, and it's only by his suffering on the world tree, his passage into the realm of death, essentially, that he can receive the runes, the language, the written language. It's only by that process. He couldn't have had it before he suffered. So there is this sense in which, whether it's Christian or other kind of traditions, to become something more than you could ever be at the beginning, you have to go through a process of unlearning about yourself, of losing something of yourself, which is deeply painful, but you come through the other side something so much greater than you were before. And that's true of the individual and of creation more broadly.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'd like to contradict what the Birch is saying in the chat and, and say that. Sorry, he was just saying that Odin's self-sacrifice was voluntary, contrasting to Jesus. I think the ultimate purpose of, I mean, Jesus's teleological story is that he is conformed to the will of the Father, which is that he goes to the cross. It's almost like the cross is already overshadowing the nativity that we are moving towards in the church calendar currently, and he kind of prepares himself from that nativity until he walks to Calvary in a way that is fully voluntary. But I think that kind of sanctifies the myth of Odin. It kind of shows that if you're put to death, essentially by being hung on the tree, which is also the curse that Christ takes on himself, so that we don't have to take it onto ourselves. And that's this daily process of repentance that I was referring to in the beginning of the stream as well, where you daily die to yourself. You daily remember your baptism. That process really is the thing through which something greater is allowed to be brought forth in you and through you. And so, yeah, there was something that you said earlier that also made me think. And I can't remember what it is, which is dreadful. But it did have something to do with this bringing forth the gold through the refining fire, the suffering, I guess, that we are all inflicted with. Oh, the knowledge of good and evil. I think that's also really fascinating, is that Adam and Eve have everything in the beginning in paradise. They take this fruit because they want more, and instead of God saying, "It's over, I'm going to destroy everything now," in the narrative of Scripture, he says, "I'm going to destroy the way that I made you and bring forth out of you something that I planted into you from the beginning, but that is even greater." And that, I think, is what we have in Christ glorified in the ascension. And that's how he always works. It's almost like where his creatures fail him, he takes their failure and makes out of the failure itself the crux and the pivot of a much more marvelous and great eucatastrophe, or victory over the powers of darkness that keep trying to confuse him and overthrow his creation.
And I think this is something that in the book, and I made a note of it, that actually for a number of characters, their finding of home, through this wandering process, comes with an act of repentance. That first, in a sense, they have to find the home that they lost through their wrongdoing, whether that was with family or tribe or homeland. It's only once they've gone through that process of repentance that they are able to physically be at home. They have to get right, I guess, within themselves or morally and spiritually before they can have that on a social level. And even then, it's not a straightforward process. There's some characters who they've repented, and others, acknowledge their repentance. And even then, there's feelings of estrangement which take a time to heal. It's not just a click your fingers and it's done.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's I find scars and so on very, very interesting, or just the organic way in which God has brought things about. I mean, clearly that's how he desires things to be, and the way in which we heal, and yet there are stigmata, or scars that are left behind, like the wounds of Christ's crucifixion that one still sees to this day on his hands and in his side as he sits at the right the right hand of the Father. That's something that defines him to us, in which something that was that belong to the transient history of the earth has been taken up into the eternal glory of heaven, I guess, which is really beautiful, actually, I think.
So there's a passage by Carlyle in Heroes and Hero Worship, which doesn't often get much discussion, actually, but I think it really ties in with what we've been talking about. In this passage, he's actually defending, calling Muhammad a great hero, because the objectors to him, to Carlyle saying this, are saying, well, look at the terrible things he did. And this is Carlyle's response. On the whole, we make too much of faults. The details of the business hide the real center of it. Faults, the greatest of faults, I should say, is to be conscious of none. Readers of the Bible, above all, one would think, might know better. Who is called there the man according to God's own heart? David, the Hebrew king, had fallen into sins enough, blackest crimes. There was no want of sins. And thereupon the unbelievers sneer and ask, is this your man according to God's heart? The sneer, I must say, seems to me but a shallow one. What are faults? What are the outward details of a life, if the inner secret of it, the remorse, temptations, true, often baffled, never-ended struggle of it, be forgotten? It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps. Of all acts, is not, for a man, repentance the most divine? The deadliest sin, I say, were that same supercilious consciousness of no sin. That is death. The heart so conscious is divorced from sincerity, humility, and fact, is dead. It is pure as dead dry sand is pure. David's life and history, as written for us in those psalms of his, I consider to be the truest emblem ever given of a man's moral progress and warfare here below. All earnest souls will ever discern it in it the faithful struggle of an earnest human soul towards what is good and best. Struggle often baffled, sore baffled, down as into an entire wreck, yet a struggle never ended, ever with tears, repentance, true unconquerable purpose, begun anew. Poor human nature, is not a man's walking, in truth, always that, a succession of falls? Man can do no other. In this wild element of a life, he has to struggle onwards, now fallen, deep abased, and ever with tears, repentance, with bleeding heart, he has to rise again, struggle again, still onwards. That his struggle be a faithful, unconquerable one, that is the question of questions. What do you think, Philip, of that passage?
I think I really like that. I mean, there's this story in Genesis 9, I think. Maybe it's Genesis 10, but I think it's Genesis 9 where Noah gets drunk and he falls over and he's naked. And then his son Ham comes into the tent and he sees his father's nakedness exposed, and he goes back out and he goes to his two brothers, Shem and Japheth, and he says, oh, I don't know if he laughs at his dad, and he basically just says, well, our dad is lying naked in the tent. Haha. and then Shem and Japheth don't think it's funny. They take a cloak, they put it over their shoulders, they walk in backwards so they don't have to see the exposed vulnerability of their father, the guilt that he has, his shame, quite literally in the Hebrew. And they drop this cloak over him so that it's covered up. So they didn't see it. They cover it up. And in doing that, they are considered righteous and they are blessed by Noah. And Ham is cursed by Noah. So at least the son is. So I think in that story, one also sees how it's not our role to expose or to point out the faults of our fellow humans. We were not put onto this world to judge our brothers. Do not judge, lest you also be judged, right? As our king teaches us. But we do have a responsibility, I think, to encourage one another and to help one another be disciplined in our walk. But so there is a place for reprimand and so on, but it comes out of a different place. It isn't to condemn. And I think, yeah, I like the way that he put it. I mean, I'm not a Muslim, so I clearly disagree with the teachings of Muhammad, but I also don't think that it's necessarily helpful to retrospectively condemn him as though we were God. And I think it's the role of Satan, by virtue of, I mean, the Hebrew word Satan is the accuser. I think it's the role of the accuser to throw the sins of people in their faces. And I don't want to identify myself with that role. So I'd rather be possessed by a different spirit than the Satan. Like the Holy Spirit, for example. Which
good choice. Yeah. Good choice.
Yes. Thanks. I wouldn't call it a choice, but anyway.
I know.
But
I know. We're coming, I guess we've maybe got half an hour or so till the end of the stream. So I just want to encourage people, if you have any questions for Philip, please get them in the chat, whether it's super chat or comments, and we'll have some time to maybe look at some of those. But before we get to that point, I wanted to ask you kind of on two topics that we haven't really addressed yet, or maybe one of them tangentially. We've spoken about maybe some of the ways in which you have to engage with tradition as human beings and as maybe as an author as well, and you've touched on how certain characters maybe have certain influences, biblical, for example. What were some of the other influences upon your writing of the story and the kind of the world that you've built here, and how did you kind of navigate the line between copying and adapting and building upon? Because I think that's something, it's quite a hard thing to do, especially when, if you look at a pre-modern kind of approach, imitation would be the word that they would use in terms of building stories. To us, a lot of it looks like copying, but it's done in a certain spirit, which it isn't just taking Homer and saying, "Oh, that's mine." It's actually something more than that.
Yes, more Germanic texts definitely played a role, like all the Icelandic sagas in the influences that I had, and then also just German. I grew up on like Grimm's fairy tales and other fairy tales. Like this one called Zwergnase, which literally translates into the dwarf nose, and that's also a really creepy, weird fairy tale. And I've been reading a bunch of them in recent times again, out of the 1700s and so on. And they really had a profound influence. The German fairy tale literature, just the German fairy tales, not only Grimm's fairy tales, but also the others, they had a profound influence on shaping my imagination. I think I had a dreadful fear as a child of monsters and a deep fascination for them at the same time. There's another paradox that drew me to them and repelled me from them, and made me have nightmares and not be able to sleep at night out of fear that something was under the bed, for example. And I think all of that kind of comes out of these fairy tales. But then later on, as I grew in faith, I would say, the fear subsided, and I could still engage creatively with these figures and figments and spirits out of these stories that made me want to explore more ancient literature that was being drawn on to write the fairy tales, I guess. And yeah, so Beowulf was definitely something because that inspired Tolkien. Tolkien was a big inspiration, which I've already mentioned. C.S. Lewis was as well. I think a lot of other English literature also out of the 18th century and so on. That also influenced the language, I think, that I went with for the work, because it's, again, trying to capture some kind of a distant aesthetic. And other than that, well, the Germanic elements that are nascent in, or that's not the word, is it? Well, they're kind of in the English language. I tried to work more with the Germanic elements of the English language than with the Latinate ones. Yeah, so there's a lot of different things that came together there. I'm a native German speaker as well, so that also influences a bunch of it. And yes, and then regarding the question of copying and adapting, that's difficult. I don't know if I really did it so well. I think the archetypes that are engraved into what we are as humans, again, if we are buildings, then our blueprint kind of determines that we have certain, that we're shaped like houses that are intended to house certain spirits, and that these spirits have characters, I think, and so we've got a lot of room for a lot of different personalities inside us. And I think that what we see being brought into expression in literature throughout the ancient world, and then as traditions develop, what we see being repeated and copied, if I will call it that, or readapted and the like. I think what's actually going on there is that these personalities and spirits that we continually come into contact with, that we wrestle with and try to get the upper hand over, these are being brought into expression through the artworks that we create. And so whether we refer to literary traditions or whether we've got our own experiences that we're trying to digest through literature, I think we're actually engaging with a much more objective reality than we often like to admit, especially in academic spheres, because we think we can trace back the origin of a specific archetype or something to Homer. Homer came up with that sort of story design, so that's a Homeric story pattern or something. Meanwhile, Homer was just wrestling with what he was entrusted with by experiencing life, by being a human. And so, yeah, I think the way in which I tried to write the book was that I was trying to do justice to the fact that I am a child of God in this world, and I was digesting a lot of my own difficulties, and I was using what instruments I had inherited through the traditions that I was in contact with, that shaped me, that pruned me, and so on, as a tree. So that I wasn't a completely wild tree when I wrote the book, but there was definitely some cultural appropriation that was going on. To give a very rambly and disorganized answer.
So in a way, this is a quasi-existentialist work. Then it's working through your experiences, in a sense.
I think it is. Yeah, It's interesting because in theology, currently where I am anyway, there's the existentialist approach and the metaphysical approach are pitted against one another quite strongly. But I think if you come into contact with the metaphysical or ontological realities that undergird the cosmos, then that's a very existential point of contact. So it is definitely also existential, yeah, but not exclusively.
And what the other aspect I wanted to ask you about, and this, I guess, ties in with the influences that you were talking about, Germanic and Icelandic and so on, is that you've developed your own languages for this story and for this world. And you mentioned Tolkien, and he very much set this precedent, or this idea that for a culture to have for a true kind of engagement with a culture, you need to understand its language. But conversely, language only has meaning insofar as it's tied to the stories from which it has, or which it transmits. Because without that, it is void of its greater significance, what's being said, or the resonances, we might say. So you managed to work language into your book, and I was wondering, first, how do you even go about creating a language, and what what do you do with that? But then secondly, well, actually, answer that first, and then I'll ask you the second question.
Okay, thanks. Yes, that does me a great favor, because I struggle to juggle things in my mind at the same time. But the language, well, I think language. Well, I work with languages as a student of theology. We need to learn ancient Hebrew or biblical Hebrew, and Koine Greek, the common Greek of the time of the New Testament, especially, and Latin as well, to work with church historical documents, which you will know well. And so I've had to work with languages based on that. I grew up bilingual, so languages have played a big role in my life. And then growing up in South Africa made it even more fascinating and important, because you were a German in a country where that was a very small minority, and you were constantly surrounded by, in my case, it was English at home, and then also, German at home, and then English at home as well, and then in school and at church, because I was in an English congregation growing up, and then Zulu, because that was the territory within which I grew up, was a predominantly Zulu territory, and then also Afrikaans, which was another Germanic language, so that also made the sort of Germanic relationships between different languages become more apparent as I was growing up. So that was also playing a role, and Zulu is also one of the bases for one of the languages in there, despite the fact that my knowledge of Zulu is quite wanting. But so it was definitely something growing up that I was in contact with all the time, and it was difficult and fascinating to see how these things shaped the way in which we interact with people, because you're able to relate to them more or less. And so the competence that one has in a language gives one a much greater flexibility when it comes to moving through society, which is something I need to work on. But because sometimes I'm lacking eloquence. But anyway, so I haven't perfected it by any means, but that's something that's fascinated me for a long time. And then coming across Tolkien and what he did gave me a lot of clarity and direction with things that I was already doing. I mean, every child, I think, tries to create like secret languages to speak with their friends and so on. I had a friend with whom we created like a cipher that, so you could speak any language and you would apply the cipher, and then it would kind of give you your own secret language. And that was really cool. And then we would create our own symbols for the alphabet and so on. So then coming into contact with Tolkien refined the process and made me realize there's more to it. But only when I then started to learn Latin. I think Latin, a lot of people say that when I learned Latin, I suddenly understood English, or when I learned Latin, I suddenly understood German, or something like this. And I think learning Latin especially, but then also Greek and Hebrew, especially Hebrew, because it's a Semitic language, not an Indo-European language, so it's also a different language family, and gives you a perspective on how different languages can also be, gave me an understanding of more abstract structures that are more general, universal, that belong to all human language. And eventually, especially when I was looking into like Finnish, and Zulu is like this as well, and Turkish and so on, I began to realize that languages are really fundamentally just little bites of meaning that you can put together in a lot of different ways. And you can do that like the Chinese, where you invent like a syllabic system, or you can do it like we do with an alphabet, which makes it, I think, a lot easier. And I think with that insight, I could then decide, okay, what's the kind of skeleton of the language that I want to create, and what kind of a symbol or sign system do I want to use, across which the language can then be encoded and decoded. So you recognize the signs, and then you can read the language and decipher the different particles that are coming together there. And that's the foundation for what I did create. I didn't create like massive languages that are actually real. Well, they are, I guess, real, but they're not as sophisticated as the ones that Tolkien created. Obviously, I'm not anything near him, but that's how I went about it. Long answer to a short question.
And I guess one of the aspects of it, and you say it's not been built up as much, but you work that into the story in the sense that oftentimes words are not necessarily understood by the characters. Maybe they're coming across a language that they don't know, and part of the story is learning what these symbols mean. Or there are as the story progresses, there's this idea that certain characters know certain words which can actually change reality or manipulate reality. It's Tolkien talked about two forms of magic, one being magia, which is the ability to, through maybe a word, a spell, immediately change the physical world. And I guess that's what these words can do in this story. And that really fascinated me, because we've been speaking about how the book was meant to be an experience from the very beginning, with the face coming out of the spine of it. It's coming out into the real world. The feelings of these ideas that we've been discussing, it's not just meant to be a self-contained thing, that actually the words that you're using are meant to kind of flow out and impact the reader and shape their way of seeing the world, and thus their experience of life, and actually change something very fundamental then, in terms of their relationships to what's in the world. And so, in a sense, then, the very act of reading this novel has this kind of magical quality to it that's reflected in this exploration of language's power.
Yes, there's something there that also, it's still something that I'm wrestling with quite a lot, because I don't know to what degree writing a story like this is manipulative, and to what degree it's being parabolic of truth. Like, either you're telling a parable, maybe they don't have to be as sharply contrasted as that. Either you're telling a parable or you are misguiding people by generating an experience that is ultimately distracting them from a story that's much greater, despite the fact that it's trying to be a shadow or a representation of it. And I wonder if you've got any thoughts on that dilemma, because clearly, yes, it's got this magical power to capture people and to guide them through an experience in a magical world, and it might even give them the lens to interpret their own reality in a way that's much more appropriate and much more true. But what if it brings them kind of to the front door, and then it tells them to rather turn to the left and look through the window, and never to walk through the door, and that's all they do for the rest of their lives? That's a concern I have. I don't know if that's legitimate, but yeah.
I think it's a good concern to have, because because this book this book doesn't do that. But yeah, I think it.
Okay, well,
No,
So far
no,
basketball.
no. I think it's something that I do think that it's a danger with a lot of different kinds of storytelling. Today, it's primarily TV or film, where we have this kind of sense, and I go back to the book itself, that it doesn't impact us, that we just have an experience and then leave the cinema. But actually, that's shaping the way you're going to experience the next few things in your life. And if you repeat that process, it shapes your values, your relationships, and fundamentally then your being in a kind of metaphysical way. The best example I could think of actually is I used to play when I was a teenager Grand Theft Auto, uh, 4, whatever 5, I don't know which number it is. But I just remember like playing it for a week and then coming away and then starting to think in my mind in terms of, some people don't, but a lot of people have an inner monologue. And I started to have swear words in it. And I thought, where's that coming from? But yeah, I'm playing this game where every second word is a swear word. No wonder it's shaping the way I'm thinking. And and then I was thinking, well, actually, I'm thinking much more utilitarian about other people and much more callously and
Hmm.
in a much more shallow way. And the game has that built into it in its narrative. It's all about kind of how much money can you make, how many people can you kill, uh, how much sex you can get. That's about it. That's the game. And you're actually punished in the game if you try to be like hand yourself in, for example. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I did a test on this. So say you go on like a little robbing spree to make some money. Well, if you die, there's no penalty. You just like wake up out of hospital with all your money and guns and things. If you hand yourself into the police, you get a charge taken off your finances. So you're incentivized to go out in a blaze of glory, killing all the police, than
Uh,
handing yourself in. So that was just a very small example, but I could see very clearly that it was having an influence upon the way I was thinking and feeling about the real world and my kind of actions within it. So I definitely think that you've got to the very fact that you're aware of that is is very encouraging to hear, and I think it's a danger that all texts come across, all stories, and to some extent, no story created by mortal man is going to be able to overcome that difficulty. Um, but I do think though, we've been talking about conformity with the divine or opening ourselves up to that and allowing allowing it to shape our lives and cut away things from it. And so I think if you're coming at it with that spirit, then there is going to be gems within there and a directionality towards it, which is going to point us more towards that teleological end than if you don't have that attitude coming towards it. I think that to me would be the starting point. Is that where the author's coming from in their approach to it? And it will bleed out into the work, even if there's aspects which are not, uh, directing in that way. That to me, it's not sure kind of guarantee, but it seems to me that that certainly that certainly seems to be the case with the authors I've read, such as Tolkien and Lewis. And then, I would say your book, Edward White's book, which I'm discussing with him tomorrow, you're all coming from it from that perspective. And I see that. But even if it's not a fully like Christian perspective, I think when I read like the Norse sagas, for example, or Egyptian mythology, I don't think it's the full truth, but I see gems within it. Whereas when I read something like Game of Thrones, I see I don't see that in the same way, because I don't see that desire to seek the highest in it. Whereas I do, at least in in the stories about Odin, for example, even if I think they're not to the full fruition that we see in Christ. That was a long, rambly answer. That was my turn to give that. But what do you think?
Well, that was I thought that was very lucid, actually, and
Okay.
helpful. So I'm grateful to hear that. Yeah, I think it's fascinating how often the answer is, well, if you're aware of it, that's a good sign, and let that be a continual guide. Don't let your guard down, I think, and this kind of awareness, I think that's so. I'll take that along from what you were saying. I think that's always helpful. And that's the function of divine law, I think, as well, is that it's supposed to expose things to you that you were unaware of before, so that you can navigate better, to steer clear of things that are destructive and do things that are constructive. Yeah.
Indeed, and maybe just another aspect. I remember C.S. Lewis saying, "Don't try to be original. Try to seek truth, and then you will be original." And I do think that's a major issue today. Is, well, certainly in academia, you cannot get your PhD passed, for example, unless you get marks for originality. And then when it comes to kind of storytelling, it's all about, oh, can we take a new take on an old subject, or show that we have something new to say about the world. Whereas actually, if you're seeking what's true, then actually, okay, it might not have novelty, but it's going to be far more original than the striving for originality, which often comes across as quite shallow.
Yes, yeah, I agree with that. That was also something that I kept encountering when people were reading the book. Well, I didn't keep encountering it, but it did come up a couple of times. The fact that what I was doing was very similar to Tolkien's work. And that the question was essentially, are you sure you want to make it so similar to something that already exists? Don't you want to be more original? And I kind of said, no, I don't really want to be original, because I want to move. I don't know. I want to move within the things that, or through. I want to move in the framework of things that, not the framework, but it's more like. It's more like, I guess, moving within a circle of friends or something like that. There's something that the friendship itself, I think, might be a nice metaphor of truth. It's something that's certain, that's been tested, and it's proven itself. There's loyalty and trust there, and love and courage and so on. And I think that's more what I want to move around in when it comes to storytelling. And if that ends up looking too similar to Tolkien for some people, and that's fine by me. I benefit a lot from Tolkien.
I would say there as well, because I definitely see like the parallel in building a mythological world with lots of history and depth to it, with a range of characters and so on. But if you read The House of Noth, which I encourage everybody to do, go and buy the book, or buy it for somebody that you know might like it for Christmas, just around the corner. I didn't get the feeling like this was similar to The Lord of the Rings in some ways, in the sense that for all the things we've been talking about, the themes we've been discussing, and the kind of treatment of, how to put it, the fact that we live in a world which is epistemologically broken off from its metaphysical basis. I think The Lord of the Rings isn't that kind of world, whereas I think The House of Noth, to a large degree, is wrestling with that sort of question. And so, to me, although the form of the world is similar, the creation of cultures and drawing on Norse saga, for example, is similar. The thematic content is treating the same reality, but in our time and in our context, not in Tolkien's at the end of the 19th century. And so I don't want people to go away with the impression that, oh, I don't need to read this because it's a shallow copy of the Lord of the Rings. Actually, I think it says something distinctive from that you wouldn't see in the same way in the Lord of the Rings, and it has its own world. Which, well, this is my final question. The world is so big and expansive, and there's lots of little hints of stories in the past and maybe things that might happen in the future, which are not really fully explained or addressed. Maybe distant lands as well. Is there plans, perhaps, Philip, for future stories within the Roots of the Day?
Only God knows. No, there are certainly. I mean, only he knows if it'll ever materialize. But there are certainly plans to return to the roots of day and to continue to explore those roots and to find what grubs lie beneath.
Excellent. Well, we have a little bit of time to look at some comments. So first up, we'll do the super chat. We've got one super chat today from Sabine Wren 21, formerly Ellen Hutter, for £5. Thank you very much, Sabine Wren. Very much appreciated. Heraclitus, one can't stand in the same river twice. This has had an impact on my life throughout my experience. I guess this was in relation to when you were talking about the place of the river within the story, Philip.
Yes, that's the pre-Socratic who said Pantare, I think. Unless it's anachronistically ascribed to him. I don't know. But yes, it's yes, I think that's what it was referring to. It's also definitely imagery that's shaped my life. The chaos, the heaving tides of darkness. So I can relate to that.
Is it so? This is interesting because when I read the book, I guess this might have been an aspect which was in the background for me, but the stronger emphasis when I was thinking of the river was the river as a place of life. It's a source of life. I live in town of Berwick upon Tweed, on the River Tweed, right at the mouth before it meets the sea. And it's an amazing place because within its waters you find lots of salmon and other kinds of fish. There are many birds that live on this river, various forms of herons. Then you've got the seabirds also resting up here during the winter and so on. Many forms of kind of vegetation as well. And then when you look at the book of Revelation and the meeting of heaven and earth, the new heaven and the new earth, from the throne of God proceeds a river, which is the kind of source of life within this new kingdom. So is this another one of these paradoxes of the constant changing of a river, which seems to suggest transience, but that at the same time it is the source of so much life?
Well, I'm glad you brought it up, Nathan, because because that is definitely at the other end of the river, kind of geographically, literally as well. But there's it's the fact that the river people have these kind of river deities in a sense. I'll call it that for now, and these are the source of the river people, their origin in a lot of ways, and they give the river people their shape in terms of their culture and their tradition, and they also are essentially immortals, so they are not at all transient, and yet they are the kind of the deities of the rivers of that which is transient, and there, yes, you've got like the spirit hovering over the waters in a sense. bringing life out of the infinite potential. And yet the way in which that is done is that the potential is like we heard the shepherd saying, the potential is refined by unnecessary things being removed through that teleological process. So that's how I see it. Yeah.
Excellent. Just a couple of questions I wanted to address. So, hello, King Emperor Penguin. Good to see you as always. The intro is not new, actually. I've been having it for a wee while, but there is plans in the works for my own introduction to this show. So hopefully soon there will be a wonderful artistic rendition, which will be exciting. Sabine Wren, let's see. You had a question. What was the source for chimpanzee behavior video? Francis Duval or Duval? I can't pronounce his name, but he wrote the definitive original work on this. Let me see. It'll be in my folder somewhere. And it's been very influential since that point. It really founded the field of studying chimpanzees as Machiavellian, which is quite exciting. Let's see. I will have a look and I'll put it in the comments somewhere. But yes, it's Francis Duval, and whatever his first major book is, maybe if I search him, Franz Duval. That's what I'm saying. Francis Duval. What am I talking about? And his first book. Let's see.
Can I just, in between, note the fact that the House of the Wolfings has been brought up in chat, and I really appreciated that book. That was definitely also an inspiration.
It is Chimpanzee Politics, Power and Sex Among Apes. So that is the book. Probably not as good a read as the one you've just referenced, but a very different kind of story. Let's see. So Bjarki had a comment. Greta's Saga. I haven't read it, but given you've suggested it, I will go away and have a look at it. Have you read it, Philip?
It's got an incredible scene where Greta, the strong, there's a whale carcass that's washed up on the shores of Iceland, and he takes the rib. I think he takes the rib of this whale carcass and he kills all the men around the whale because he wants the whale blubber for himself. Or for his people. I can't remember exactly but it was great. It was a great. Yes, I've read it, and it was also an inspiration.
I mean, with a description like that, I don't think I can't read this. I mean, it sounds amazing. But yes, thank you, Bjarki, for that comment, and I'll have a look at it. Yeah. So, Philip, is there anything you would like to promote?
The book, I think, and your channel, which I can't, because I'm on your channel, I can't really promote it. But yeah, yes, the House of Noth. My lighting is too terrible to show it to you, but you've shown it. Thanks. Otherwise, I think Lambda Bible Studies is always doing good things, and I think another big someone who's helped me a lot in recent times is Reverend Fisk, who's a Lutheran pastor who might be a bit abrasive a lot of the time, but he's really got some great theories, especially on fiction. So that's something maybe that I'll still throw out there, but that's it from my side.
Does he have a YouTube channel or books?
Yes,
or something?
It's Rev Fisk, I think, REVFISK, and he's also written a couple of books like Dust, which is about he also has an approach to human nature which is very wholesome, I think. I don't know if Dust was about that or if it was Without Flesh, I think is what that one was called. Anyway, he's also written one about all the rules you should break as a Christian. So
that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Cool, cool. Well, thank you for coming on today. I very much enjoyed it, and I feel like I've I've learned a lot as well. It's built upon what I felt from the book and given it some articulation and expansion. So I'm very grateful, Philip. Everybody should go and buy The House of Noth and give it a read. I think you'll love it and enjoy it. And it's good. It's good also just to support people who are making good stuff in our sphere. And tomorrow, I have somebody else who's been doing that. Edward White. We're going to be discussing Escape from Labyrinth, which is his, I guess, adventure fairy tale. And we're going to be delving into some of the themes of that and exploring some of. I guess there'll be some crossover between these two streams. But yeah, come and see that. It will be good fun. And then on Saturday we have Apostolic Majesty, and we're doing Breaking Bad Part 2, which will be excellent, particularly because I'll finally get to talk about this. I can't wait to explain. Everything revolves around Huel. He is the key to everything.
No, I'm curious.
See, it worked. It worked. Anyway, till next time. Good night, everybody. God bless you, wherever you are, whoever you are.